thank you so much for joining me.
Absolutely. It's great to see you and be here together.
Yes, it's an awesome place, too. To get to film in here is actually really cool.
Yes. Such a venue, and to be in here when it's silent in the room it makes it extra special.
Reflecting on your journey, what was it like transitioning from performing in prestigious venues with the amazing Biava Quartet to helping essentially shape the artistic vision of the Pittsburgh Symphony?
Well, in many ways, I would say it's wildly different, yet there are an incredible number of intersections. And I say this often, the path that I took and followed and created with the quartet, though it's very different than my role and what I do with the orchestra, a very different animal unto itself, I actually couldn't have been better prepared to do what I now do from all of those experiences and the incredible journey that I got to walk together with my quartet. One of the really interesting things is, you know this very well, I'm preaching to the choir here, but a quartet, any artist, and I would actually say it's more critical now and probably with each passing day than it even ever was 2 decades ago or prior, is that being an exceptional musician and artist is the baseline. There's so much more that nowadays goes into shaping a career, carving out your identity. Of course, we had management, but the group still has to work with the manager. You're trying to figure out your own niche, what makes you special, where your heart really lies as a group. I was the person that led gravitating toward that role of very early on thinking about what is our identity, how do we want the next year to look, what does that arc look like over the next 5 years as you start to make choices of what concerts you do you accept something maybe for the good of the community that doesn't pay your fee, what slice of the repertoire are you going to present, your work in commissioning, your work with young people in the communities. It unfolds all from there. And I naturally, without knowing even so much about it, because there was really no formal training for any of that. We were very fortunate. I formed the quartet with my colleagues when I was 17 years old. I knew it was something special, but now having perspective and looking back, to even have the idea to do that, the audacity in a certain sense, and also the commitment. We were so 100% sure that was what we wanted to do. I was at Cleveland Institute of Music, where I started my undergraduate. I was very fortunate to be accepted into the studio of Robert Vernon, who was the longtime principal violist of the Cleveland Orchestra. If he takes a student in a year, it's one. So you need a great day of playing, but you need luck on your side. You need all of that, and it fell into place for me. I was fortunate to have met him a few summers prior at the Encore School for Strings, which was a wonderful, wonderful program. CIM had chamber music at its heart, at its center. It was not just a nice to have or something you do on the side, led by Peter Salif, who was the longtime second violinist of the Cleveland Quartet, and the Cavani Quartet was in residence there at the time. Don Weilerstein. Many of the people that were part of that ecosystem, they really put that at the center. And having been at Encore and frankly, having the chance to have dipped my toes in some of the repertoire, myself and the colleagues who ended up forming the group, we were just very committed to that. And there's a funny story. We landed there. The normal thing is you do your audition for the orchestra seat, and then they put you into groups. But you can also say, "Hey, I want to play with these people." And I hadn't played with the other colleagues that ended up being the Biava Quartet, but I knew them from Encore. So we'd heard each other play, but we hadn't made music together. So it's a leap of faith. But at least there was, it wasn't totally unknown. We knew how each other played on our own. So we thought there's a better chance of maybe this working than otherwise. And I remember we got together and we were going to start rehearsing immediately, and we had big plans, and we're going to play the Brahms C minor quartet. This happens to be one of my very favorites. Our first violinist had this also on his list, and we showed up. We went to the library. We got the music. We started practicing it. We showed up to the first session with Peter Salif, and we told him the plan was for Brahms, and he just kind of paused. And I still remember this because we laugh about it. He said, "How about we start with some Haydn?" That was what he said. And at the time, we felt so deflated because Brahms, we were gunning for this, and we were really committed to it. And he, with so much wisdom and so much care, said, Brahms isn't out, but we need to start somewhere else. And of course, to find the group and the sound and just to know how to start working, there was no better advice than to, just as he said, start with some Haydn, which is very different than Brahms, but was wise for cleaning the sound and the intonation and the purity and in a certain way the sparseness of what's there. It's not the textures and the density of the Brahms, where you can never hide anywhere. But maybe some of that. But he was so sharp and spot on to direct us that way for the Haydn, and we got a great Haydn. It was one of the Opus 76s. He suggested that we learn, and that was such a fortuitous beginning, because it's really a 101 in quartet playing, chamber music playing, the traditional roles of the instruments in the group, a bass line that has to be led from the bottom up, balancing the sound, tuning chords and the thirds and the harmonies, and yet there's Haydn has a twinkle in his eye, and so there's wonderful genius that a turn of a phrase or a note here or there that maybe if that wasn't there would make it a little more ordinary, but with Haydn it adds that sparkle, and so there was so much to delve into, and that was how the journey began musically,
Sure.
so to speak, with the group.
Well, you have these two amazing sides that we're just keeping with the quartet side for a second. Can you paint a picture for someone who maybe doesn't know what it's like to be in a quartet? What is it like to be in a room with your quartet colleagues, to crack open something like the Brahms and to dive in? What's the collaborative process like? What are some of the emotions that you experience when you're trying to interpret such a masterpiece like that?
It is a high intensity, full range of emotions experience. When a group is working well, and of course what you hope to find is a synergy amongst the players, so that there's four equals in the group, that there are four minds that are all coming together, hopefully a certain unanimity of approach, but you actually want the interesting, contrasting perspectives. If it were all the same, like a conversation, you actually quickly lose interest, because there almost needs to be a certain tension, a push and pull, like in anything. And for me, that makes it dynamic. So I think a key ingredient is at first starting with four very strong, fantastic people. You don't want cookie cutters all of each other, but you do want a certain mutuality perhaps in the basic approach. And I feel as though we were fortunate to have this Cleveland tradition and the Cleveland quartet tradition, Don Weilerstein, Peter Salif. This is a very specific approach and school of thought on how to play. And going back to what I said about forming at 17 and really having no idea what all was to come, it's actually incredible to have found that at such an early age, because we were all very much still being shaped as people, as musicians. I actually look at it now, you're quite in the infancy of who you will become and your journey. So it's a very malleable time, which is a good thing, I think, because we created it together, we found it together, we molded it together, which is an approach. And there's some other very, very successful groups that have a long time Persin, and they are, it's very much this way, and that I've seen work equally as well. But we were fortunate, I think, to basically be sculpting it together. I often say, the best of the best. I actually have not really found something that really replicates that experience when it's working well. I should add as with the little asterisk there. To get to live with the repertoire, I actually have very conscious moments. And I remember we were in New York City, we were in residence at Juilliard, and we were in one of the big rooms, chamber music rooms, way high up in the building, and you're seeing the beauty of the city and the expanse of the city. And we were working this particular time. I just happened to remember we were working on a Haydn quartet, and I just remember being very conscious of the moment in time of how fortunate am I to get to spend my time and to make a living doing this, to be able to sit and to day after day get to live with a work of art, with a piece, and to unpack it more every day, to understand it more, to sometimes have be surprised as your own perception or perspective changes by living with it, or by what someone else says, or by just the sheer fact that you're touring with it that year or half a year and you get to play it 75 times. There's something incredible about continuing to always mine the score and maybe noticing something like a great book or a poem that has withstood the test of time, or a piece of visual art that there's always something dynamic there. Your relationship to it is ever changing. And the interesting part of a quartet is that not only are you doing that individually, but you're collectively doing that. Maybe something isn't sparked for me in that moment, but how the first violinist just turned the end of that phrase that I have to pick up or dovetail or overlap with him, he's informed or given me a new angle that I've never thought of or seen myself. And so you have this happening almost manyfold ways. It's not just your own relationship to it, but it's with all of those cross relationships. And it could be a person to a person in the group. It could be the lower strings to the violins in the group. It could be the inner voices. You can slice the diagonal so many different ways, which I find so intriguing. And there's always more. There's always more to draw you back in, to have you take one more look, to have you listen a different way. And so that aspect of continually mining what's there and always looking at it anew. A space can change it, an acoustic of a space. Sometimes you just never heard that. I know you all are often capturing what you're doing and listening back, and we did that quite a lot. That was something that was really encouraged, and I think is one of the best ways, because you sometimes think, or under your ear it sounds a certain way. If only we could be playing, but also have the perspective of being in the hall and hearing how it actually sounds there. Because I remember, as a violist, we can share this together. Sometimes just the way it's written, and you think it's cutting through, but actually when you hear the recording, it's actually barely in relief enough, and being able to have that perspective. So space can change that. It's also, there were many rehearsals that one of us walked out of. And I now, it's actually, I laugh now thinking of it, because it's actually silly in a certain sense, because when you have a road ahead of you and you're going to play a piece 85 times, if once it wasn't your way, it's a little silly to have seriously had a rehearsal completely come to a stop because of knocking heads over something. But I actually believe that you don't want to encourage this all the time, or you get nothing done, right? You never learn a new piece. But I think on the flip side, the commitment that embodies, that people felt that strongly, that they had such a distinct view that if it wasn't realized that day and it was enough for you to leave, there's actually something in a certain way worthwhile about that, because it really meant that there was a commitment, there was a belief, there was a passion, there was a vision for what someone thought it would be. Again, now thinking like, oh my gosh, we left a rehearsal over that. How how foolish or how naive at the time. But yet it's that I think that you want these four incredible individuals. I remember this Michael Tree, he would always say, the great thing about playing in a quartet is that when you don't vibrate a note, you have three other people who should immediately pounce on you. And that word pounce, it's like you have three other colleagues, three other sets of ears, three other, I don't want to say teachers, but partners in a certain sense that are challenging you, that are shaping you, that are in dialogue with you. And so I've yet to really find something else that has that dynamic.
So many beautiful sentiments in there. I mean, specifically definitely for quartet music, but just it seems like in life in general, this idea of first having a strong opinion on something that's informed by something, not just maybe gut starts it, but it's coming from somewhere, but then having the ability to share that and bring that, but also the malleability to allow that to be changed with new information or things. I think that's beautiful, especially thinking about that in terms of sculpting art.
Absolutely, it's really and I don't mean this in a light way, but it's a lesson in relationships. It's a lesson in leadership. It's a lesson in being a team member, being a colleague, negotiation, even some parenting lessons in there. How to maybe have influence, when to know it's not worth putting up, dying on the vine for a certain concept, or idea.
Well, since you mentioned some of those words, let's dive in on the other side. I'm curious, what's it like to sit in a beautiful office or conference room with a renowned music director, maybe the director of finance, of marketing, of development, and as a team, sit down and plan out the next season? How do you balance artistic vision or with financial and logistical considerations?
It is a puzzle. It is a challenge. And I actually think that must be what I am attracted to in many of these settings, because I love, like the quartet, or I wasn't simply content to be the violist alone. I of course was there as a violist, but wearing the many hats on the business side, speaking about pieces, working with perhaps to make a commission or find the money of how you do that, working on your website, your brand, your image, all those things. I think that makes me tick as well in this current role. No 2 days are ever alike in my current job, and I think that could be something that maybe drives some people crazy, but I actually love the variety of it. What's interesting is, similar to the quartet and to the music making, I think it really exercises both sides of my brain. So there's an incredible exactness that comes with it when you're booking, 3 seasons out and it's a specific week, and the details of this piece, which commercial number, the addition that someone might want to do, the order, the sequence. There's an incredible, very, very, very high level of detail that goes into a lot of that work that you simply can't miss on. You have to have that pinpoint perfect. There's also an enormous creative exercise to it as well, which certainly feeds me as a person. So we are at this particular moment in time. There's certain fixed aspects to a season. For example, we at the Pittsburgh Symphony do 20 of our classical weekends that are subscription weekends. So there's a certain grid that looks a certain way, but then within that, it's totally open to how you might design that. So a question that when I first came, so does a weekend always have to be the same? Could we look at a weekend that more like a festival concept where this happens here, this happens here? Okay, if it's a weekend that's a double, well, can I do something different on the Saturday night, like a special that's only happening once? And what might that look like? How do you then work backwards and craft the week and make sure the rehearsals get in and work and all of those things? There's lots of intertwined elements. So while one of the things I love the most about my role is to get to be in the sandbox, so to speak. So I'm sitting there with Manfred Honeck and every guest conductor. These are all individual conversations with them, with the artists, of what they might want to do. But then on the back end, we have to work that through with every department. So, okay, a piece, we're a full orchestra, but pieces have what we call extra instruments. So if there are saxophones in the piece, if there are a very large number of percussions that are beyond our complement, all of these things, that's a factor. You need to procure the music, so renting the music, the licensing for it, that's a whole other factor out here. The puzzle of the rehearsal schedule, which is superimposed over our collective bargaining agreement, the contract, which has to look a certain way. There can be X number of rehearsals in a week. They can be this length. If there's this many services in this week, it then dictates what goes around it. Artist availability, that's a puzzle unto itself. Manfred Honeck, one of the most in-demand conductors anywhere in the world, and fitting in his weeks and then working around them and trying to catch people maybe when they're in the States, especially the artists coming from farther away, so that we can be economically efficient and also with their time coming back and forth. So there are so many aspects and angles that go into it, but it's the duality again of the exactness of some of those aspects. Of course, the financial end of it, the details around the pieces and that entire puzzle making it work, but also the chance to reimagine what a 21st century orchestra is. I think COVID is, while that was of course a very difficult time for the industry, in many ways it kind of cracked the grid. It cracked some of the fixed things that were always, well, why do we do that? Well, that's how it's done. It overnight almost shattered that. And I found it, of course, it was a challenging time, but it was actually an exciting time, because you can either cower in the corner and not know what to do, or you think really big and you do different things. And so I was fortunate to be able to do that, and had the support and the backing of our orchestra, the musicians, my fellow colleagues, to try and do some very different things that were very successful. And absolutely, some of them were things we were already experimenting with, but we were able to do them in a bigger way. And many of those things continuing to inform our path forward. And And I think changing and evolving, a lot of things around the experience of a concert. It doesn't change necessarily the music we're playing. I think we're actually playing a much wider variety of music, which is a wonderful thing to have opened up the canon even more. And looking, especially, I'm very interested in living composers. I'm very interested in the creators today. Who are these names? Who are these next great names that are carving their own paths and doing things that are different? How do we give them a platform and get them on stage? But also around the experience itself. What does it mean? Yes, we have this kind of model of an overture, a concerto, a symphony. That's great, and there's a reason that occurs, but that's not the only way of doing things also. And what does that mean, and how do you guide the audience through that?
It's really cool already seeing the parallels from some of the things you were talking about with the quartet life into this. There's so many parallels. I'm curious, you alluded to one thing, I might just reframe it in quartet rehearsals, because I've also experienced this a handful of times, this idea that sometimes a new avenue of thought or a new idea can be arrived at or be born out of a difference of opinions, and you arrive at this unique thought or this some of the try that you might not have arrived at as individual thinkers. Does this, elements of this type of collaboration also happen with teams when thinking about season and multiple seasons in that setting as well?
I think it does. I love, my approach always is I love to have outside eyes. Sometimes we all get so close to our own work or our own vision for what it is we're setting out to do, and that needs a certain focus and determination, and you can get just a little bit blinded by being so tunnel vision on what you're trying to carry out or seeking to accomplish. I love that about my work with Manfred Honig. He absolutely accounts for me, not just in this role, but as an artist. He wants to me to exercise those muscles still. I try to also take the same approach with my team. I love group working session and approach of putting any and all the ideas on the table, and there's not a bad one. And it's always very interesting to see where you arrive. I always like to say there's a program, arriving at a program, and I'm sure you experience the very same thing. It's never a straight line. Sometimes you think you're setting out to do this, and you're on that way, and you may, at the end, nothing might resemble that, or a kernel of it is where you started, and you've built and you've blossomed around it in a totally different way than you may have expected. And for me, that's very stimulating work. I'm actually really interested as well, as I said, I alluded to the work across our departments. People having very different experiences from other places where they may have come. The musicians often have wonderful ideas that they're approaching it from their side of the stage, but somebody takes, oh, you did this and I love this, maybe think of this, and what about this? And those are very, very interesting conversations in their own right.
I wonder, is Biava Quartet, I wonder if that the four of you, the collective artistic vision was in ways more unilateral in its intent. I suppose that would mean to say something like if a presenter approached wanting a more audience-friendly program, I would imagine that the thing that Biava would not do is reach for a set of pop songs transcribed for quartet. Maybe you would consider an alternate Shostakovich quartet or a modern work that focuses less on extended technique, maybe more on melodic or thematic ideas. Is this in the ballpark?
Absolutely. I mean, that's one of the again fun parts of trying to match music, repertoire, program ideas with different situations. If it's a very highbrow, lauded festival that's been around for 50 years, that takes something different than we did an immense number of school concerts. That was something we were very committed to. And what can that audience, what is best to excite them, to bring them in? And it's actually, that in and of itself is something very interesting, because I've actually found that children are some of the most open listeners. They have the most open and non-judgmental ears of any audience that you might find. So we actually would do sometimes some very fun things with du tuyau and extended techniques that were hitting the instrument and the wood on the bow and playing behind the bridge, and that gets them, that immediately their eyes are open and they're laughing, or it's such an unexpected thing. So that's one little test case of what's an example. It's such a vast repertoire, as you know, and that's one of the most magnificent parts of playing in the quartet. I think as many years as I played, there were many pieces still on the wish list that we never got to or read, and never necessarily toured with. And Arnold Steinhardt, the first violinist of the Guarneri, has the same in his book. He wrote a wonderful book, and he's talking about a lot of this from the inside. And he would talk about every year they'd have this reading party, and there was always some piece he would bring every year, and it never ever made the cut. It was sometimes it was close, and then it would get out, and this poor quartet that just never got played. Sometimes something that had been set aside many times gets in, and then the thrill of that, right?
I think there's even a video of them reading about it. It's such a charming piece, and someone's like, no, it's not, it's horrible, just...
But that's one of the best. I mean, it's such a treasure trove of the repertoire, and that's something that's so just endlessly fascinating about the art form. We all dedicate our lives to this, and there's always more to know. There's always more to discover. There's always more to find, and things being created today, things from the past that maybe don't have their due place, things that were actually marginalized and held back from maybe their time in the spotlight, overlooked. Someone like Haydn, I mean, how many quartets there are. There's some that just are played more than others, but some that are fantastic, or Mozart, and that's an endless point of fascination. But absolutely, trying to design, and that's something that very much that is an important part of what I do now. You're trying to design someone's experience, really. And that's I really think that's what programming is. It's you're creating a storyline for them of some sort, and there's many different ways to do that. They could be very disparate elements. They could be somehow connected. They could be influenced by each other. They could be born of a similar influence, all of them, but take like a spoke, go out on very different directions. They could all be pioneering in their own. I mean, there's so many ways to cut that. And absolutely, I think it's an important part of the job of a performer is understanding the audience. It's really a programming 101 is know your audience. If I'm programming the orchestra to play a summer concert outdoors, that's something very different than programming what we'll take on our European tour, or knowing the artists, what are their strengths. That's another, we're fortunate with someone like Manfred Honeck. I mean, there's second to none for his Beethoven, his Mahler, his Bruckner. I mean, Tchaikovsky, so many things are on the list, but there's some things that aren't necessarily his footprint of repertoire. And my job is who can I bring in to, the French repertoire is not something that he necessarily feels he can do anything but most akin to, but there are great experts in that uniquely know that better than anyone else. And who can I bring and have in front of the podium, or an artist with a concerto, for example, that they have a very deep relationship with, that you kind of want no one else but that person doing that in a certain sense. And so there's I always say an aspect of my job is matchmaking that way. It's not only putting artists together that I think will have a synergy with the orchestra, conductor, soloists with each other, but it's very much on the repertoire as well. You ultimately want somebody that feels very strongly about that piece or program. That's the best person. There's really no point for me to kind of twist someone's arm to do something that they don't have their heart in. I really want someone to come where they can really give it their own distinctive stamp and own it and offer something incredibly insightful or unique to that interpretation. So it's kind of matchmaking several ways across the program, which is it's a very fun thing to dip your fingers in.
Sure. Stepping away from specifically Pittsburgh Symphony, just thinking about orchestras at large, I imagine that being a part of an administrative team, there are certain basics that need to be considered. Ticket sales, is the audience staying consistent, the number of audience or at least increasing, or maybe even efforts to bring maybe the overall age of an audience down. And I wonder if the potential solutions to these considerations is just far more wide-reaching, and if in the past 20 to 30 years, if the pool of assumed potential solutions has grown to include features that might not otherwise have been considered were it not for robust administrative teams.
Absolutely. I like to think of it as we all stand together. Yes, marketing is specifically responsible for the numbers, for the sales. I'm specifically the person responsible for programming, and you want those experts heading their individual areas. But I really believe I stand with marketing if something doesn't sell at all, and why is that? Or perhaps I'd ask a different question. Is it in the realm of possibility that there could be, across the contours of what an orchestra needs to do across the season, whatever that diet is. Perhaps there's just some weekends that we should be doing anyway that we know aren't going to have great sales for artistic reasons, for other reasons. I like to think of trying to match opportunities, put them in fertile ground. So I like to think of, for example, Valentine's weekend. That's typically a weekend where many people are going to be looking to do something special. Perhaps people that don't come regularly, they want to impress their date, take them out to something really nice. So what should that program be? And that doesn't mean it's a easy listening. It's actually, what kind of soloist might I want to have there? Maybe it's a very young, dynamic, up and coming. I may want to have a living composer on there, that program, so that people are hearing something very vibrant and a product of this time. And maybe the composer's even there to speak about the piece. Maybe there's a war horse on the second half. That's just one example. But trying to match the programs with some of these opportunities. What should an opening weekend look like? What does our gala program actually is a program typically for orchestras that kick off their season? Who comes to that? It's actually, I know for us, it's one of our widest audiences of anything. Some people that only come to that and they come to nothing else. So what should that kind of a program look like? What do you want to be showing them? It's almost like a showcase of a certain sort to present to them the array and the breadth of all that we do. But our work, my work with our marketing, with our communications teams is very intertwined, and I feel like I'm sure it works best when they have an understanding of, from our end, why we're maybe putting together what we're doing, the secrets inside the program, and that we're co-owners in the success of that ultimately. It's really not, I think it's maybe siloed is the way it was 20, 30 years ago to look for solutions. I think there's so much to be done with bringing music to people, meeting people where they are. We did an incredible project. It should have been for the Beethoven year and ended up being delayed because of COVID, but I called it Beethoven in Your Neighborhood, and the idea was to play all 9 Beethoven symphonies with Manfred Honeck conducting, and none of the symphonies performances took place in Heinz Hall except one, which was Beethoven 9, because we needed a very large venue for the orchestra choir and be able to have an audience, right? But all of those were in community spaces, from a black box theater to the science center to the airport. So we were crisscrossing Pittsburgh with these performances. And the second arm to the project was we played all 16 Beethoven string quartets, and it was made up by groups from within the orchestra, and we did them throughout the Carnegie Library system across Pittsburgh, and they were free. And when you think of that, we were doing what we normally do, but it really reached the community and people in very different ways because we were meeting them in their spaces.
Taking a hard right, things like the general music industry, things like streaming, very much shaping how music is consumed or even thought of or even in some respect valued. Or something like AI is certainly questioning what does it mean to create. And you have these models that are existing more on the business side that are influencing the artistic output for people to be able to work within them. Do you imagine there would ever be a scenario, or there could be a scenario, where orchestras at large, due to the massive considerations of administrative things like ticket sales, things like this, that those could be so large that they could stand to reshape, or are currently at large reshaping the artistic landscape of what an orchestra can be?
AI is a really incredible, the potential there is incredible. Where that goes, I think, still remains to be seen. I've read about it a lot and try to stay up on how that maybe affects our industry. I actually had a very interesting conversation. There was a company out of Berlin that was using AI to basically sharpen marketing skills. So they were able to, through AI, I think it was like 98 data points about a concert or event, were able to amalgamate all of those, the weather, what else was going on, the time of day, previous sales on that particular repertoire, perceived traffic in and around the hall, parking, all of these data points, an incredible amount of data points. And what they claimed to be able to do was to be able to help you craft your ads to be the most effective. And so they were able to do that by using all of that information to generate, I think it was 20-something ads, and then they're running data on those every single day to see how they're performing. And so what they start doing is like a funnel, siphoning off the ones that aren't performing. So tracking people, seeing them, clicking on them, and a purchase or a sale coming as a result of that. And so they're able to slice off all the ends and then reach, you're left with, you strain out, and what you have are the ones that are presumably being the most effective. So that's a really, really interesting concept, if that works and is effective. Now, it needs an incredible amount of data fed into it to get it to start. Like anything, it's only as good as the input. So I think that's a big unknown, and something that terrifies me a bit about AI is it can be polluted so easily with bad information going in, that then it's doing all its right process, but it yields a faulty result at the end because it was misinformed, at the beginning. So that whole concept is something that there's much more to come on that, I think. Is really, really interesting. At the same time, it may sound old-fashioned, but this is a live art form, what we do. And there's a wonderful quote. I won't be able to share it 100% properly, but it was a business person kind of looking at the model of a symphony and scratching their head at how 200 something years later could it not be more efficient? We can't make more people be more productive. We can't cut out rehearsing. We can't, it was kind of like anything else you want to be able to always make it faster, better, quicker, this. And they came to kind of like a standstill on the model of the symphony, because you actually can't really do that. And that threw them for a loop, but actually in a certain way it speaks to the power of what we do. It's human. It's living and breathing. It's different every time it's created, even if it's the same people playing the same piece. I'm sure that somehow withstands every test of time, because that is magical, what can happen when real people with their brilliance and our own faults or inadequacies on a certain day come together. And I think that I believe that endures, and that never can fully be erased.
Well, I can't think of a more beautiful way to bring all of this to a close. I certainly appreciate you being willing to come and speak with me.
Absolutely.
There's so much. I could do 4 more hours, but
I could too.
This is thank you.
We'll be here until the morning.
It was super hard to not geek out more in the quartets, because it's like, and
to actually talk about it.
My best memories of coaching ever are with Mr. Solomon. Just